Today you see some neat tops, also a dress, and they have a polo collar and placket that is super easy to sew. I've also got a sneaky refashion in here where I used parts of one of my son's old t-shirts to make one of these. Hi sewing friends, I'm Karina from liftingpinsandneedles.com. Welcome to this channel that is all about sewing, limitless sewing, and today I have 4 garments to share. 3 of them are tops, 1 is a dress. I've got them for all types of weather because the fabrics are all different. And this is a brand new pattern from Love Notions that's been released today called the Frankie polo. So I've been working on mine for quite a while, very different looks with the same pattern, and I'm excited to share. You know, it's called a Frankie polo, so you know the type of neckline we have here. You can see it in the line art. It's got a placket and a collar. The placket doesn't have buttons. And then there's other features that you can mix and match depending on the look that you're going for and the length that you want, because this can either be a top or a dress. The difference with the dress is that it has a center back seam and different shaping. It is an entirely different pattern piece, so it's not like it's a different cut line on the same pattern. It's got a slightly A-line shape. And then the tops have a split hem, which the dress doesn't have. The front hem is slightly shorter than the back. You can always even that out if you want to, that's easy to do. It's meant to be around the mid-hip area depending on your height. For the sleeves, you have length options as well. If you want to do a short sleeve, you can either add a knit cuff, which is that separate pattern piece, or a woven cuff, which has a notched detail. That's super cute. They're not the same pattern piece, of course, because if it's a woven cuff, it has to have the same circumference over here than a knit one. So they are different pattern pieces. And then for the long sleeves, you have the typical cuffs. The cool thing about the Frankie is that you can do the placket and the collar accents with woven fabrics if you want. And I would suggest that because it would make it easier for you to sew. And you could use up little scraps of amazing wovens that you might have around there. So I love the mix and match of the knit and the woven that you can do here as an option. Of course, you can do them in a knit as well, but I'll talk about that in a second. Because the Frankie is a brand new pattern, it'll be on a discounted price through next week, Monday the 6th of November. It's always a 1-week release sale. It's about a 24% discount-ish. Remember that at checkout, if you use my code LPN10, you get an extra 10% off on top of sale prices. That is the current code. The code is changing every 3 months. So if you see this in the future, just always make sure you look at the description box or the pinned comment because the updated code will be there. Using my link doesn't cost you anything extra. You just click there, it'll take you directly to the website. And what happens is that I get a small commission back. That is one way I make an income making videos on YouTube. So if you use my link, I'm very appreciative. This is for knit fabric, so don't try to make this pattern in a woven fabric. It's just not going to fit correctly. And even though I said you can sew the collar and the placket in woven fabrics, you cannot sew the front and the back, the main pieces, with the woven fabrics. You need a knit that stretches at least 20%, both horizontally and vertically, to have a comfortable fit. And in my opinion, the structured types of knits are going to have a nicer result and a better experience for sewing. Cotton lycra, French terry, athletic knits, rib knits, sweater knits. I'll put an asterisk on rayon spandex, modal spandex, bamboo spandex, ITY. They might be a little too light to hold up all of these areas here of the collar and the placket. It might be a little too heavy, the contrast. So I do have one sneaky version in a rayon spandex, but I also matched it with a lighter woven for the placket and the collar as a way to sort of match the weights there. But if you're not that experienced in sewing, I would suggest you don't use something that's too lightweight and hard to work with, and just choose something that's a little more structured. For the placket and the collar, if you want to do it in a woven, you can use a cotton lawn, for example, shirting, sisaka, linen, chambray. What I would not suggest is using rayon, for example. I think that's just way too light. Even if you interfaced all the pieces, it could end up looking a little floppy. Other types of fabrics I would not touch for the collar and the plackets, like cotton and gauze or crinkle rayon. Any woven that has a loose weave that might stretch out of shape and grow is just not going to give you a good result. It's not going to end up crisp. It's going to be harder for you to work with. For my woven plackets, I've chosen linen and linen blends in different weights, and for one of my versions I actually did a knit placket. You need a little bit of fusible interfacing for this area, the bottom of the placket, to stabilize that area, and I would suggest you stabilize shoulders as well if you're doing a long sleeve version. You also need some fusible interfacing for the collar piece and the placket, and now this all depends on the type of fabric you're using. So I wouldn't set this as a rule, how many layers to interface, whether to interface or not. I think it will all depend on your fabric. For my linen collars and plackets, Because they were medium weight and quite structured, I thought one layer for the collar was going to be enough. So for the upper collar and the collar, I left uninterfaced. For the plackets, I decided that my linen was heavy and structured enough to not need any interfacing. But for my knit placket version, I did interface that, and I think if you're going to use a knit for the placket and the collar, you should interface them. Find something that doesn't stretch so in essence, that interfacing, when it's fused on, it'll sort of eliminate the stretch of that piece in every direction, and then it'll be like you're sewing your collar and your plackets with a woven. That's going to be the sensation. Although you are using a knit, all that stretchy factor is going to go away and it's going to make you have a better experience. Sizing goes from extra small to 5X. That goes up to a 59.5-inch hip, and we have a standard bust and a full bust option. You would use the full bust option if you measure your high bust and your full bust and the difference is 4 inches or more, or that would be equivalent to a D sewing cup size or more. It would give you a better result than doing the standard bust, which would work for A, B, C sewing cup sizes. Remember, the full bust option gives you the same fit around the shoulders and neckline, but then gives you more space at the bust, which then translates down to the waist and hips of 2 extra inches. So take that into account if you want to do the full bust option, that you are going to have a looser fit at the waist and hips that you can easily bring in if it's not what you want, but it's helpful to have that amount of extra ease at the bust. I just use the standard bust all the time and I'm fine with that. The ease at the bust will be anything from 3 to 5 inches of positive ease. It just depends. Remember, when you're doing the full bust option, you have more space. Then at the waist, you have plenty. You know, this is a pretty straight design there, so 7 to 8 inches at the waist. At the hips, we have a very minimal ease, basically anywhere from 0 to 3, depends if you're doing the full bust option or not. Don't worry if you think you have 0 ease, because we have the split hem there, and the split hem is high enough to land around the high mid hip area before your full hip is there at the circumference. So that vent is going to open up and give you the space you need, and I think it's important for that vent to be there for that purpose. So don't try to just sew down the side seam and not do the vent unless you want a really fitted top, because that's how it would end up being if you don't sew the vent. Fitting adjustments, I really didn't do any fitting adjustments. I just chose my size, which is an extra large with a standard bust. And for the top, after making the first version, I thought I'd like it a tad shorter, but that's just personal preference. I am actually taller than the drafted height, and I think everyone knows where they like their tops to be. Some people like them longer, other people like them shorter. So I did that adjustment above where the side vents are, so to not affect them. And my top is 1 inch shorter. But for the dress version, that one is 2.5 inches longer, just for it to hit me above the knee. Otherwise, I would have ended up with a mini dress. For the sewing, we're going to see all the pattern pieces. I'm going to focus on the neckline, the placket, and the collar, because I think that's where you might want to see some visuals. Otherwise, all the rest of the construction is very, very easy. Now, when I show you the pattern pieces, I'm going to show you a little bit about a refashion I did. Well, it's not a refashion, it's like repurposing, recycling pieces from an old garment and using them on a new one. So you'll see one of my son's old t-shirts, and I'd been eyeing this collar in that t-shirt for quite a while, knowing I wanted to remove that collar and use it for this one. So 3 of mine have the regular woven collar from the Frankie, but one of them has a sneaky rib knit collar that you'll find in ready-to-wear polo shirts, and I think it looks really cute. You'll see a technique that wraps the seam allowance under here in the collar area. You can also just leave it normal and serge, then it will also be neat. But I've decided to show you how I'm concealing the seam allowance there. There are many ways to do it. I'm just showing you the way that I like. This is the center front of the Frankie. You're going to have this little shape. This has got to do with the placket construction, so it's important to cut this accurately. It's important that this ends up the original width as well, so make sure you place this on the fold very accurately. And we're going to be snipping into these corners, so we do need to stabilize this area. I'm just going to put a strip of interfacing right here. This interfacing is non-stretch. You don't want your knit to be stretching here later on. So this area now is really nice and stable. Sweater knits can stretch out easily here on the shoulders, and there's going to be a long sleeve here. So I definitely want to stabilize this, so I'm going to fuse some interfacing along the shoulders right here. For my sleeveless version that I'm doing, of course I'm not doing this, and it just depends on the fabric whether I do it for the short sleeve versions. But for this one, definitely I want to keep this stable so the sleeves don't weigh this down. Now these are really stable. This is the collar piece. You're supposed to cut 2 on the fold, but I prefer to just create an extended piece so I don't have to put them on the fold. And I have 2 layers of fabric here. It depends what fabric you're using, whether you want to interface 1 layer or 2. Because this is linen, I think interfacing the upper layer is enough and the under layer is not going to be interfaced. If I was working with a lighter weight cotton or rayon, then I would interface both layers. I'm doing block fusing. I've got a slightly larger piece of fabric with interfacing already fused on. And now I can cut both layers at the same time. The top layer is interfaced, the bottom layer isn't, and this is going to ensure that they are both exactly the same. There aren't that many pattern pieces for the Frankie. Both the front and the back are cut on the fold, and you have this excess of seam allowance on the sides for the vents. These are going to end up at the high hip area, opening that up so you have more space. This is the front there, and that is an area that was interfaced, so it's stable. This slanted edge there, when it's opened up, is going to have the placket on both sides. There is a placket. The placket can be made out of woven or knit. This is a woven. It's actually linen in almost the same color as the sweater knit. And my collar pieces are also linen, and I have 1 layer interfaced, the other one isn't. There's a long sleeve there with a regular hem. There's also short sleeve versions with a little band or a little cuff. I'll show you that later with other versions, but this one's going to be really, really simple. This is one of my son's school t-shirts from his uniform, and he has quite a few. This one's looking quite sad. It's got a few stains that I can't remove. I'm quite happy to tear this up, and I want to use that collar. These are the ones that you can buy on their own, or you can also repurpose and get them from things like this. This navy and white I think is really pretty. The blue areas are in good shape for me to use this fabric. And because it's a knit, I am going to be interfacing this for the placket so that it can eliminate all the stretching. Now, if you can see, these sleeves have a hem, and there's a little navy piece underneath just for decoration, and I think that looks really cute. So I'm going to try to replicate that with my Frankie. I'm going to unstitch and use this navy piece here for the short sleeves of the Frankie as a little hack. So I think that's going to look really cute. And here you can see the collar up closer. This is a type of really dense rib knit that stretches. So whatever length this has, I'm going to be able to mold that to my Frankie. You can see this has a technique where it covers the seam with binding. I'm going to try to replicate that as well. This is a knit that I'm going to use for this placket, and I think if you're going to use a knit, you should interface it and interface it with non-stretch fusible. It'll just make it lose all its stretch, and it'll be easier to sew everything. It'll basically act like a woven fabric if you interface it. So that's what I'm going to do with this one. For other woven plackets I've done, depending on the weight of the fabric, that is what is going to make me decide if I interface or not. So if it's a lighter weight cotton poplin or something, I would interface it. But if it's a heavier linen, then I wouldn't. And like everything I interface, I block fuse. So this is a piece that's slightly larger, that's already interfaced. Once that's happened, then I cut away around the edges and I get a really exact piece. So here are both my plackets. It is a knit fabric, but now that the interfacing is there, it doesn't stretch in any way, shape or form, and it'll act like a woven placket now in terms of sewing. I would not use a knit placket without the interfacing. It would just be harder to work with and might not end up looking so neat. These are the pieces for my short sleeve version, where I'm going to use pieces that came from my son's t-shirt. So here's that collar that I took out, and I think it's going to look really pretty, the navy and the white with the red over here. This is a rib knit, and I've got the back and the front. The plackets came from the sides of the t-shirt, and you saw how I interfaced that to keep it stable. Short sleeves, and these are the little pieces I took from the t-shirt hem. And I'm going to try to do that as well with the t-shirt. I think this one's going to look really cute. Now, one thing about this, these are usually smaller. If you look at this pattern piece, I've got it extended like this. If you align it like this, it's going to look shorter. Looks like I'm missing a chunk right here and right there. But remember, this is a knit, and it's supposed to stretch to match the neckline. So it stretches easily. I'll easily be able to sew this into my neckline without a problem and have it match. This came from an adult size t-shirt, a men's adult size t-shirt, so I don't have any worries that it's not going to fit the neckline of my top right here. You've seen me sew many collars before. This one's really easy because the upper collar and the under collar were cut from the same pattern piece, so both are the same. I've got them right sides together. I'm going to sew them with the interface layer on the top, and I'm going to sew the short end and the curved longer edge of the collar. The shorter end has notches. Some are for the shoulder seams, and I've marked an extra one for the center back just to help me later. So we're just going to sew this seam at 3/8 seam allowance. And if you've seen me sew collars before, you've probably seen that I don't like like just pivoting on the points. I like to finish the seam and then start again, so I have an intersection of seams, and I think it makes the area stronger. I'm not going to go and trim away the seam allowance a lot later on. I'll just fold it and I always get a nice result, so that's how I do mine. Afterwards, I'm going to trim away the seam allowance just a little bit, not that much, just a tad. Now it's time to flip it and tidy it up. I'm also going to go to the iron, press it and get it all ready for top stitching. Top stitching is optional. I don't think you have to do it. It's your choice. I'm going to do it at 1/4 inch and just go all around the edge. It'll keep it neat, and this is linen, so linen always looks nice with some top stitching there. Here you can see my finalized collar. This would be the original collar of the Frankie, but you know that for one of my versions I'm using a rib knit collar that I took out of one of my son's old t-shirts. This rib knit one is a little shorter, it's stretchy, and I'll be stretching it to match the neckline, but the technique that I'm going to use to sew it in is going to be exactly the same. One difference is that the woven collar doesn't need to be stretched, obviously, and the knit one does, but the way it's sewn into the neckline will be exactly the same. These are the placket pieces. I'm showing you my cotton version that is interfaced, therefore it has no stretch. Just choose one of the long ends and fold it in by 3/8 and press it. I help myself by doing a guide stitch. That means I don't have to guess the seam allowance when I'm pressing that in, and I don't have to burn my fingers that much. So I'm just doing that quickly with a long stitch length. I can remove that stitch later on, but it will help me press and get a really nice result. Here we can see the two plackets. One of the long ends is pressed in by 3/8 and the others are raw. Make sure they're mirrored, of course. Now this placket is designed to be longer than what you need, so you're going to be trimming off some at the top. I've drawn a dot 3/8 away from the raw edge, about 3/4 inch above the bottom. Made that dot be in the same place for both sides, so if I put these right sides together and poke a pin through that dot, it'll be exactly in the same location on the other side. This dot is important because it's the one I'm going to use to match to the neckline where I have other dots marked from before. This is the wrong side of the top. You saw that I interfaced a small section there to stabilize. There are dots marked on the pattern, and I drew a horizontal line across them that will help me sew later. And then I'm going to have to snip diagonally into these dots later. I've also drawn that there with a friction pen, but I'm going to wait until way later on to do the snip. All I'm going to do now is sew the plackets in. I've turned the neckline over to the right side so that you have the right side of the fabric looking up at you, and I'm going to align the raw edges of the plackets right sides together here. I'm going to do one first and then the other. That dot that I drew there, I'm going to poke a pin and make it match the dot on the other side where it's interfaced. That should match, and then I'm going to pin going up the neckline, making sure not to stretch the knit there, keeping it as it is. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, so both plackets are there, dots are matching on both sides, and I'm going to make sure I have the same distance that is left over on the top so that we end up with plackets that have the same length. What I'm going to do is just put these plackets right sides together right here so that I can align them at the top. And I'm also going to put the neckline areas together, the red fabric, so that everything is exactly the same length. Then I'll be able to trim away on the top exactly the same, and I'll end up with plackets that are the same. Now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and sew from that dot up. I'm going to do that with the interface side up so that the stable area is touching the presser foot and the neat part of the neckline is underneath touching the feed dogs. That will keep this really stable and will prevent the knit that's underneath from stretching out while we're sewing. Once we've got these plackets there, we're going to press the seam allowance towards the placket, and then this other side that had been previously pressed is going to be folded onto itself and cover that seam, and that's how we're going to end up with a really neat placket. All the seam allowance is going to be tucked inside, super neat. So I'm going to align these on the top here and trim away the excess that I don't need. After trimming away, I'm going to use that amount I trimmed to trim away the same amount on the other side of the placket. That's how they're going to end up the same. We can see the navy there, right sides up. Now that seam allowance and that's underneath about 3/8, that's as far along as the collar is going to be tucked in here. So that's important to note. I'm working on my knit collar. It would be the same if this was the woven collar, just matched up the center backs there. With the woven collar, you're going to have a mark that will match the shoulder seams. I've already sewn and serged the shoulder seams. In this case, this one stretches. I'm just going to stretch this collar to match my neckline over here. With this one, I'm going to conceal the edge of this with bias tape. You could, in essence, just serge it if you want to, and I have done that with two of my versions. But with this one, I am going to conceal it. Twill tape doesn't really conform to curves or stretch or anything, so I think it could turn out looking a little stiff in here, so I'd rather just use bias tape. Remember, the seam allowance is 3/8. I'm meeting the collar a little inside, so sort of where the seam allowance is, so that the collar is tucked in about 3/8 right there, the edge of the collar. And I would do the same with the woven collar. The only difference is that this one is a little stretchy. Okay, there we have the collar pinned in place. If you were just going to serge this, all you would need to do is bring this forward, make sure the seam allowances match right there, and then you would sew your seam, catching this area, catching all of this, and then you would serge it. Then when you flip it to the other side, you're going to have a clean serged edge. If you do want to cover this with something, then it's different. We're going to keep this extended for now. What I have here is matching bias tape I made from another project. This is linen. So what I did here was just press this area flat and just leave one fold. This fold is a little under 3/8 of an inch, which is exactly what I would like as seam allowance. And I'm going to extend this and put this a little further in, just a little bit, so that it passes the collar, but it doesn't have to go all the way to the center, so that this ends up covered in the end. I'm going to pin everything again. I'm going to pin everything again using the same pins I already have, because this step can be done in one go. It's just easier. So I'm going to be sewing inside that crease, catching this edge of the bias tape along with the collar and the neckline. Because it's on the bias, it's going to conform to the curve. It'll also allow the fabric to give, because fabric cut on the bias does stretch a little bit, so that allows you to do that. This then will wrap around like that. And now I'm going to trim away all the excess here. I just want a single layer underneath. But remember, it has to go beyond the collar right there, at least 3/8 of an inch. As you can see, I'm sewing right into that crease, which is almost 3/8 of an inch. Make sure your seam allowances from the shoulders are going towards the back. Now you can see that this is going to cover the seam allowance. So the width of my bias tape is wider than what I need. All I want is to wrap this around over here and have a single layer underneath. I don't need this to fold over and fold like that. That would just be extra bulk that is really not necessary. Just as long as it's going to cover this, I'm going to put a pin so that I know how much I actually need. So I'm going to be trimming all of that away and just leaving the amount that's necessary here. Having trimmed some excess away, you can see now that this is going to fold over in a single layer and be less bulky. So that will cover the seam, and then this is where we're going to top stitch over here, catching that. I'm going to use blue thread on the top and red on the bottom, because I have red here on this other side. It will still be covered by the collar, but still I want it to look as nice as possible, so that's what I'm going to do there. I took my time to wrap the seam allowance with the bias tape after trimming excess, and I hand pasted that down. Now we have this raw area to deal with, so just push this down the collar like that, bring this placket over like this onto itself, right sides together, and you can see the seam that we've done at 3/8. This fold has to meet that. Make sure the fold is right on top of that seam there, and now we can sew this from this part all the way to the edge. And then when we flip this the other way around, this is going to come from behind this, and it's going to look super neat. There we go, the seam is sewn, and now when we flip this the other side, we're going to get this little neat area, the collar coming from within. The collar is a little further in like that, 3/8 of an inch, and this placket can now be folded over to the wrong side. I'm just going to repeat the same thing I did on the other side to finish this up, and then we can top stitch this right there. I removed the basting stitches. It looks super nice there. Top stitch with navy here. On the back it was red, so it'll be really discreet even though this collar is going to cover it. Over here we still have this open, but this will be closed in a little bit, and then that's going to be super neat. You can see the binding is coming from behind this. Now this little fold there, I trimmed it a little smaller, and it'll just get tucked away in there so it's not seen. That's how this looks like from the right side. The collar is going to live like this. Now we can look at it from the wrong side, and it's finally time to snip into this area. You can see that you can get a lot done without snipping first. Cut into there up to that dot right there, close to the seam that we'd already done, and over here as well. And we're going to have this little bit right there. Now we can come and cover this. I'm going to hand baste this, and then we can top stitch on the edge. Once both are done, we can do a little overlap in the center and then sort this bottom bit out. I carefully hand basted this placket towards the inside. Don't worry about the interfaced area, no one's going to ever see it. You can see where I snipped into and where I started sewing, so it's up to there that I'm going to top stitch this placket down. Over here you can see that the bias tape is completely covered by this when we pushed it to this side. So I am going to sew this from the right side because this is the visible side, and I'm confident my hand basting is going to keep everything in place, and I'm going to sew neatly on the edge there. This area here can have quite a few layers, so I'm just going to hand crank this part right here at the top, and I'm not back tacking on any of these parts, neither at the start or at the finish, because I think it's just nicer to finish that by hand. You can see on the wrong side the seam caught everything there, there's nothing loose. On the right side it looks neat as well, so the hand basting was not a waste of time for me. I've got the other side the same. I'm just going to finish sewing that, and then we'll finish this step by doing the overlap down here. Taking out the basting stitches and being to the iron and press the two plackets. Now what we need to do is overlap them. So I'm going to overlap this one over this one. It's the way I've done all of them, but I suppose you could overlap them like that as well. These would be right on top of each other down here at the bottom, and we need to push them to the back, and we can do that because we have these little snips. So let me just turn this the other way, and we can just push all of this to the back right here. So making sure these are on top of each other right here. I've tidied this up really nicely. This is pretty stable right here. I don't think I need more than one pin. You can see the dot where I'd stopped sewing right there, and then over here you can see it on the other side, and that's why I drew a line with a friction pen, just to make it easier to make it straight. So now I'm just going to sew across. I'm going to knot these areas by hand here to avoid pockets. That's why I didn't back tack. There's a little seam right there. You can see this is being caught. These are overlapping. That's how it's going to look. Very nice, very neat. Now I still have my armholes extended. You can sew your sleeves in on the flat, or you can sew your side seams and sew your sleeves on the round. That's up to you. The side seams have these little slit areas, so you're going to sew just up to here and then leave the rest open. So all that comes after doing all of this is very easy. Remember, I've shown you this collar, but if this had been a woven collar, it would have been exactly the same thing I would have done. And if you didn't want to wrap the seam allowance, you could have just serged it all, and you would have a serged edge there that wouldn't be neat as well. This is the first one I'm going to show you. It's the one you mainly saw on the tutorial. All these navy pieces came from my son's t-shirt. The navy was actually in great condition. The fabric, the white areas of the t-shirt were terrible. That's why it was time to retire that t-shirt. And this collar is so pretty. I would have never been able to do this myself with fabric or anything, you know. I do know that they sell collars like this. I know here locally I would be able to buy collars like this, but usually not buy one. Usually you have to buy 10 or more. I think they sell them like that because you're working making garments or whatever. But repurposing, it's so good. You know, you can find a t-shirt that has a collar in great condition, and if the t-shirt's looking a bit tired, you can save this and use it here. The fact that I had to stretch it to match the neckline a little bit didn't really affect the sewing construction or anything. I only had to stretch it a little bit. And these are the way that these collars are designed to be anyway. It's nice and structured. I love the navy and the white here, and I chose a red rib knit for the rest, and I think it's so cute. I think it looks really sporty. And my son's t-shirt had this detail here where it had a bit of navy underneath the hem. So I took that piece out as well and used it over here. It was super easy. I mean, it's just a folded piece underneath the regular hem. You can see me sewing here with a twin needle. Hand basted the first hem allowance, which was from the red sleeve, and just placed that blue piece underneath, basted that in place, and then sewed it all together in one go with a twin needle. So the red hem is sort of there, and the blue fabric is coming from underneath, and that's how it looks. I think it looks super cute, and I would have never thought to add this detail if I hadn't seen it on my son's t-shirt. This is the only knit placket that I sewed, nothing stretched out of place. That was easy to do over here. And then on the side we have the split hem. The front hem is slightly shorter than the back. I forgot to straighten that out, but I probably do that with other versions. I had this navy bias tape left over from something else. I had just enough to cover the seam allowance here, and I think it's super neat. You can see that this comes from behind the placket. I showed you exactly how to do that. So if you want to try this, it's really easy. As you can see, navy thread when I was top stitching here, red thread on this side so that it doesn't look ugly, but the collar still covers it. But on this area it would be visible. And this is a pet peeve of mine on some ready-to-wear shirts where they don't change the colors, and then you would have like navy thread right here, or you would have red there because they use the same color on both sides. But when you sew at home, you can do little things like this, and I love it. I love that I was able to get such a nice result over here. This is one of my Frankie tops, the same size, everything. The total length here is an inch shorter than the original just because it's my preference, and I have blue accents here on the placket, the collar, and also on the short sleeve hem. You can see up closer that it's fairly close fitting at the hips, but those vents on the side allow that to open up and for this to fit nicely without it looking too fitted. So that's nice. This is the length that I like at the mid hip, and on the top you can see that I have a collar that you would usually find in ready-to-wear polo shirts. I recycled it from one of my son's old t-shirts, so that's where I got the collar from. But all the rest I sewed in, and I think it's really nice. I love the combination of colors here that are mainly navy and red. Tiny white detail on the collar I think makes this top really special. And I did cover the seam allowance of the collar there with some bias tape. You can see how to do that on my channel. And on the hem of the short sleeve, I added that little bit of blue knit underneath. I think that looks really nice, something special, and something I was inspired to recreate from my son's original t-shirt. Love this one. I love it with a skirt and some sandals with heels. I think this is sporty but still a little bit dressed up, just a little bit, and I love that. Here is the same top, this time a little more sporty with a white denim skirt. I use the glissando skirt pattern for this one, and I have some cool navy sneakers, a casual bag, and this is casual me. Love the combination of colors. I look like a lot of flags. I know a lot of countries have this type of combination of colors. It's a classic combination of colors, and I can totally see why so many flags use it because it's very pretty. This is my winter Frankie. It's so beautiful. I love this so much. A sort of darkish pink sweater knit, and I was able to find a leftover piece of linen in my stash from another project in a matching tone. So on camera, they're looking a lighter tone, but in real life, in my eyes, it's almost a perfect match. And yeah, it was really easy. This placket is not interfaced. The collar is, upper layer is interfaced, the under collar isn't. And this one is all the same. It's just got a long sleeve with a regular hem, and then we have the split hem over here, so nothing changes here, but I did change the sewing construction of the collar. This one does not have the seam allowances visible anywhere. I have shown how to sew something similar to this on the channel already with some shirts and jackets. I did film this segment for my Patreon subscribers so they can have this exclusive content there. Couldn't find any bias tape or anything that would look pretty under here, and I didn't want to just serge it, so that's why I decided to do it like this. Very clean on the inside and on the outside, and I'm very happy with the result. There's my stable shoulder seam, which I would always do with a sweater knit because sweater knits don't have the most amazing recovery. Now the long sleeves, you could have added a cuff there. I typically don't do that if I know I'm gonna wear this under a jacket because then it can get bulky here at the wrist. I don't like having a cuff and the jacket. That really upsets me. I really love the result here. My winter Frankie. This last Frankie is so nice. It's my winter version. It's made out of a sweater knit, and it's the only one that has long sleeves. The fit, the size, all of it is the same length as all the rest. It's just that here I have a regular hem on the long sleeves. I love this color. It's like a deep magenta in a pretty light to medium weight sweater knit, but it's still structured enough, and I really love the fit and the feel here. It's going to be perfect for autumn and winter. I've got it paired with a skirt that I really love, some blue booties. I love that bag, it's in the same tone. And yeah, it was a delight to be able to make a version like this to enjoy when the weather gets cooler. The collar and placket are made out of linen in a matching tone of magenta, so I was really happy I had a little bit left over from sewing another garment there to match it up with the Frankie. Love doing that, finding little bits left over to use is really nice. Here is a placket up closer and the collar. Now I did another sewing technique that totally encloses the seam for this version. I really love how that turned out. I have that content over on Patreon. So I'm happy to have 4 Frankies, one for everything. I have a dress, I have a few tops, short sleeves, long sleeves. You know, you can use this style for whatever weather and you can make them all different. This magenta color is everything to me. I really love it. And yeah, it'll be a couple of months before it gets cold enough for me to wear it, but I'm very happy to have made it. If you know my style and what I like to wear, and so you know that I'll sneak a sleeveless version onto any pattern, whether it's got a sleeveless version or not. This pattern does not have an official sleeveless view, but I always just do it anyway. So this is my dress version. I decided to make it sleeveless. The armhole really is not modified from the original armhole at this point. All I did was make it narrower here on the top, just a little bit. And I did that when I try it on. I just have a look and seam. I'll bring it in by about 5/8 of an inch here and just cut it a little narrower, coming back to the original curve over here. That's all. Then I did a binding technique that you've seen me do many times before, and I'll link a video that shows you how to do it here. It's an athletic knit as well over here. And I did it black just to sort of bring together the features of the placket and the collar that are black in linen. The dress, as I said, has a center back seam, so you can see that there. I like to serge it and sew it with a sewing machine and press it flat, press it open. I always like that. And this has linen, and it's harder to see the details here, of course, with black. But this one has no special seam finish here on the collar. This was just serged. If you do this simple version, it takes less time than the other options I've shown you, and it could be easier for you. It's still neat. No one's going to see this. When you wear this, it's not going to be seen. This is my Frankie dress version. I made it with a really cool zebra type print athletic knit. It's 2.5 inches longer than the original. Maybe it should be an inch longer even. It's a nice short dress. I'm not against them. I still wear dresses this length. I love them, and it's really nice, comfortable. It does have some shaping with the center back seam, so I wouldn't try to get rid of that. Nice and loose at the waist, as you can see, with nice ease. I've used linen for the placket and the collar, as you can see up closer, and I've got a non-official sleeveless view. I finished the armhole here with some black binding to sort of match the details on the collar and the placket. That's how it looks like on the back. And it's a really fun technique, easy to sew. I don't think the placket is too deep. You know, I'm not showing anything. I've sewn the collar here in the simple way, which is just sewing and serging it. At the bottom there, you can see that horizontal seam where the plackets overlap at the bottom. Loved mixing the linen with the athletic knit there, because you get the comfort of the knit garment, but also you get that nice structured feature that you find in a lot of woven styles. So it's really, really comfortable to wear. I know I'm going to really enjoy this one. Great Frankie dress. I had it on with heels and a bag before, but now I've pulled out some cool white sneakers. The sneakers have metallized details on the leather, so there's some gold and silver in there, which I think is really cool. And I just have a nice casual white bag. I could be very comfortable in this outfit like this and walk around all day. I could also see myself wearing this over a swimsuit, and if it gets wet, no worries, because it's an athletic knit, it will dry up really, really fast. Yeah, very wearable dress. I know I'm gonna really, really enjoy. Mine is a size extra large with the standard bust option. And then one option that I haven't shown you is a short sleeve with a woven cuff that has a notched detail. To make the woven notched cuffs for the short sleeves, You have two pieces on each side, so it's two pairs mirrored, and they aren't rectangles, they have a shape. And along the top you have a little triangle mark that you'll see in a little bit. I've marked it with a chalk. You have two raw edges here, right sides together, and you sew at 3/8 of an inch. And when you get to the triangle mark, you follow that same 3/8 seam allowance and sew that as well. After finishing this seam at 3/8, I'm going to cut away the triangle made with the chalk mark. This is marked on the pattern piece, and then I'm going to snip into that triangle so that I can turn these right sides out. Once this is turned right sides out, I can press that, neaten it up, and then I take the two short ends and sew those together. And after sewing that one, you're going to end up with a round cuff like this that's going to have that notch detail. This is the round cuff that you sew onto the short sleeve, and it'll match 1-to-1. You end up with a cuff that's not too narrow or not too wide, and you can sew it onto the end of your sleeves in two ways. You can sew it right sides together, and that means that the cuff will just extend and make the sleeve look longer, and you have that notch detail over here. Or you can sew it on the inside, so right side to wrong side, and then flip it over so that you can fold that cuff up. Now I have like a hybrid thing going on here. I would have liked to have the cuff folded up, but the inside of my rayon spandex is white, and you would see that here if I move the white right there on the fold. I don't like that. I also didn't want to just extend it and make it that long. So I decided that the cuff was wide enough for it to be folded up once in the end. It turns out a little narrower, but it still looks cool. So here is my wild rayon spandex print. This was supposed to be my test garment. It turned out really wearable, so I'm gonna wear it, but it's not my favorite fabric. I love the green, I love the type of green here, but this orange is not one of my favorites, but it's growing on me. I think it's a top that will sort of stand out. I've used a lighter type of linen rayon blend here, so all of this is interfaced. Here is my placket. I think the green goes with the green in there, and this is what I mean about my cuff. I've sewn it right sides together, so in theory, that's how it would be. There's the notched area, but I think it just turns out too long for what I like, and I wanted it folded up. So I think this is wide enough for you to fold it up once if you want to, and it still looks good. So that's my jam here. I've sewn it right sides together, extended it, and then just folded it up once, and the fabric is structured enough to stay up on its own. I don't need to do any hand tacking. So this one's the longer one out of all of them. Now this is the first version I made. This is a rayon spandex. It's not a fabric I would fully recommend. I think it's way too light to hold up the features. If you do have experience working with the fabric, it could work. Just note that it's just going to feel looser and a little different to the other versions. This one's slightly longer, that's why the others are a little shorter, because I prefer them a little shorter. Fabric is not my favorite, that's why I used it for a test garment. Although it's growing on me, I'm not a fan of the orange, but I love that tone of deep green there. So yeah, this one's pretty wild. I know it's not for everyone. It's pretty hard to style. I have these green poppy pants that go really well there, and I've sewn the notched cuff version there. And instead of just wearing it all the way down, I can fold it up as well, or just wear it all the way down and extending the length of the sleeve. I think that notch detail on the woven cuff is really unique, and I love adding that. Of course, I use the same fabric there that I used for the placket and the collar. Not my favorite out of the four, but definitely wearable when I'm feeling in an orange mood, I suppose. And sort of confirmed that the fit was okay for me, so it was not a waste of time to make one with a fabric that is not my absolute favorite, you know? These were so enjoyable to sew. I mean, I couldn't stop sewing them. I've already got 4. I'll probably make more in the future. They are also different for different occasions, different fabrics, different styles. You know, I love patterns that have a lot of options because you can get a lot of use out of the pattern, and the techniques were all super enjoyable. Nothing really difficult. I'd say the main things are stabilize your pieces if you think you need to, if the weight of the fabric requires it. Stabilize that collar, that placket. And this part right there, you need to do that. Otherwise, if you don't stabilize and fuse anything there, and you do your snips, it'll all come out deformed, then it'll stretch out here. So definitely you want to suppress the stretch of that area right there so you get a nice crisp placket. Follow along on my video step by step and you'll be able to do it, I'm sure. Don't forget to check out the Frankie on sale through next week, Monday the 6th of November. Find all the links, information down below. And I hope this sewing segment was helpful for you. Maybe you want to try a new technique, do something different. These tops can look super professional, and there's so many combinations of fabrics that you can use. You can customize to yourself. Remember that an old polo t-shirt can serve you. You can take out that collar and use it in the way I have, and it can look really, really cool. Just make sure it's an adult pattern and not a kid's polo shirt, because then that collar is not going to fit. But collars are stretchy, they will look amazing, and you can have something really unique. I loved using my son's t-shirt, it was the best. I've been a little absent on the channel in the last couple of days, but it's not because I'm taking a break. I'm sewing a sort of a mammoth project over on Patreon that I've been planning for months, so that's where all my time has gone. But don't worry, I'll be back with more videos in November. Bye, see you soon.